Okay, for 10.8 day 2 homework help, I just have a couple quick sketches that we will draw. Probably not having a lot of trouble with the homework, is you just have to remember a lot of the rules. So it's going to ask you to graph the following using the rules that we learned from 10.8 day 2, so we're not plotting points anymore. And we will graph these four functions: r equals 3 times cosine of 5 theta, r equals negative 2 times sine of 3 theta, r equals 4 cosine 6 theta, and r equals 5 sine 4 theta. And these are all the rose curves that we have. When it comes time for the test, if I ask you to graph, I'm going to ask you by plotting points, but that doesn't mean that you can't have an idea of what these things look like to help you. So if you're plotting points and something doesn't look right or it's just not going right, you can give me the work for your table, and then you can draw a sketch of what it would look like, and you'll lose some credit because you don't have your points accurately if you didn't get those right. But if you have the right picture, you'd still get some credit. So if you can remember all those rules, that's great, but there are a lot of them. Just the rose curves, there's quite a few, but let's go through and start. Okay, so we remember that the first number, it's like your amplitude. That tells you what ring you should go out to. So I'm going to draw the rings for this first one, but normally I wouldn't draw rings for these graphs. So that means all of my rose curves are going to go out to that third ring for a distance. And then I, of course, take a look at this. It's 5. It's an odd number, which means I'm going to have that many petals. So I should have 5 petals. And because it's cosine, when cosine is odd, I know that I should have 1 on the positive x-axis, or they would say polar axis. So I'm going to have 1 petal here. And then I know I need to have 5, and I'm just going to evenly space them. Now if I want to be exact, this is 0 degrees or radians. If I took 360 and divided by 5, I could easily figure that out, which is 72 degrees, and then I could measure 72 degrees and then 144 and so on, and I could be exact. I don't need to be. Just kind of ballpark it the best you can. So let's say that looks something like this. So I'm going to do 1 petal here, 1 petal here, 1 petal here, and 1 petal here. And they all look like they're evenly spaced. Biggest thing I'm looking at is, are you going to the third ring? Are you starting on the positive polar axis or x-axis? And do they look like they're evenly spaced in another 5? If you've got all that, it doesn't need to be exact. All right, over here. So 2 is the number I have for rings. I guess I'll go draw the rings. There aren't that many of them. I see again this is odd, so that means I keep this number. There are 3 petals. Remember, if it's even, you double the number of petals. So there are 3 petals. It's negative 2, so we'll deal with that in a second. But this is sine. So I have to think about sine, because sine had some specific rules to it. Sine, when we were starting out with the number of petals, remember it starts going kind of alternating, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so for sine, the rule that we had is that 3 normally started down here, 5 would start up here, 7 down here, 9 up here, and so on, and then just rotated back and forth. So typically 3 theta would mean start here, put 3 petals evenly spaced. You should have a graph that looks something like that. But because it's negative, it gets reflected. You're actually going to have this graph instead. Something that ends up looking like that. So again, if you recognize the rules, it does make everything really easy. It just depends on how much you recognize. And you don't have to have these rules memorized. There's no way I expect you to have them memorized. But if you have a good idea of what they look like, it will definitely help you graph. Alright, so again, the negative means that this thing flipped over. Originally, this petal should have been down here. Alright, so looking at the next one, looks like I've got to go 4 rings. So let's go ahead and do that. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And this time I look at my value, and first of all, you should identify the fact that it's a rose curve. If there was, say, a 2 plus some number and then a trig function, that would be your limacon, and of course that would be theta instead of 6 theta. But once I identify it's a rose curve, I see that 6. It's an even number, so you double it. There are actually going to be 12 petals on this, so it's going to look messy. Going to go out to the 4th ring. Cosine. When cosine's odd, you have one start on the positive x-axis, unless that's negative. If cosine is even, then you have petals on all of the axes. So you should have a petal on every single one of these axes. That takes care of 4 of them. You need 12. The others are going to be evenly spaced. Now I've got 8 more left. I've got 4 quadrants. So basically you're going to put 2 in each quadrant. And you end up with something like this. And that would be your graph. Again, very messy. All I'd be looking for here is, do you have 12 petals? Do you have one on each of the axes? And then do you have them evenly spaced, or are they going that far out? Alright, the last one. Let's go ahead and give myself 5 rings here. Alright, I can see that it is even number again, so that means I'm going to have 8 petals this time, because I have to double it. And it's sine. Sine says that you will have no petals on the axes. So I have to evenly space 8 of these without having them on the axes. And so I'm going to have 2 in each quadrant. And so I have 2 in each quadrant. And again, you just space them out the best that you can. It's going to end up looking something like this. Obviously my circles were not the best here. But I'm going to have something that looks like this. And what would I be looking for? Does it go out to the 5th ring? Do you have 8 petals? And are your axes completely blank? If I see all that, that's all I need for my sketch. So a lot of little rules that you have to remember. You have to remember your rows, curves, what a circle looks like, what a limacone looks like, what that lemniscate looks like, just so you have a good rough idea of what you're looking for. Alright, that is it for homework for 10.8. If you're having trouble, please come and ask for help.